I didn't lose my life by accident. I gave it away. Not all at once. Not dramatically. I handed it over piece by piece, every time I told myself someone else needed me more. I was good at responsibility. That's how it started. People trusted me because I didn't look away when things became heavy. I stayed. I carried. I solved. When something went wrong, my first instinct wasn't fear. It was obligation. Someone has to handle this. Someone has to stay calm. Someone has to take control. That someone became me. At first, it felt meaningful. Being needed gives you a sense of purpose that nothing else quite matches. When people lean on you, you feel solid. Anchored. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like. Stepping up. Putting others first. Delaying your own needs because they're less urgent. I didn't see the danger. Responsibility doesn't announce when it crosses the line into self-erasure. It disguises itself as virtue. Every time I postponed something for myself, it felt temporary. I'll do it later. Right now isn't the moment. Once this settles down. But things never settled. There was always another problem. Another person in crisis. Another situation that required stability. And I was good at providing it. I became the reliable one. The one who could be counted on. The one who didn't fall apart. The one who didn't ask for much. People praised that. They called me strong. Selfless. Mature. I absorbed those words like proof that I was doing the right thing. I didn't notice how rarely anyone asked what I wanted. Not because they didn't care. But because I never made it relevant. My life slowly reorganized itself around other people's needs. Schedules adjusted. Plans reshaped. Dreams downsized. I told myself it was temporary. It always is until it isn't. I remember the moment when this pattern stopped feeling noble. It wasn't during a crisis. It wasn't dramatic. It was during a quiet evening when everything was finally calm. Nothing needed fixing. No one needed help. And I felt empty. Not tired. Unused. Like a tool that had been put back in the drawer after years of constant use. I realized something unsettling. When no one needed me, I didn't know what to do with myself. My sense of identity had become conditional. I existed in relation to other people's problems. Without them, I felt undefined. That scared me. I tried to fill the space with productivity. With small tasks. With distractions. But the feeling didn't go away. I began noticing how often I framed my own desires as selfish. How quickly I dismissed thoughts like, I want something different. I'm tired of being the responsible one. I want a life that isn't built around managing damage. Those thoughts felt dangerous. Irresponsible. Who would I be if I stopped carrying everything? That question terrified me more than exhaustion ever had. I realized that responsibility had become my shield. As long as I was needed, I didn't have to face my own unanswered questions, my own fear of choosing a life for myself. My own uncertainty about who I was without obligation. Responsibility gave me an excuse not to choose. Other people's needs were always clearer than my own. So I prioritized them. Again. And again. Years passed like that. Not painfully. Efficiently. I didn't collapse. I didn't burn out dramatically. I just postponed myself until I became invisible to my own life. I started to feel resentment quietly, shamefully. Not toward others. Toward myself. For agreeing so easily. For never asking what this was costing me. For mistaking endurance for purpose. I realized something painful. No one had asked me to disappear. I volunteered. I told myself that sacrifice was temporary. But sacrifice without an end date is not sacrifice. It's abandonment. Self-abandonment. And I had been practicing it for so long that it felt normal. That was the beginning of the regret. Not regret for helping others, but regret for never asking whether anyone was helping me live my own life. The first time I considered stepping back, I felt ashamed. Not conflicted. Not uncertain. Ashamed. The thought didn't sound like a desire. It sounded like a moral failure. What kind of person thinks about leaving when others still need them? That question shut everything down. I didn't allow myself to explore what stepping back might look like. I framed it immediately as abandonment. As weakness. As betrayal. Responsibility had rewired my inner language. Taking care of others was right. Taking care of myself was optional. And optional things are easy to postpone indefinitely. I began noticing how my body reacted to situations I automatically accepted. A tightening in my jaw before I said yes. A heaviness in my chest when another obligation appeared. A strange fatigue that sleep never touched. My body was protesting a life my values were defending. I ignored it. I had learned to override discomfort. That's what responsible people do, or so I believed. There was always a reason I couldn't stop. Someone was going through a hard time. Something depended on me. Now wasn't the moment. Now was never the moment. I started to feel anger then, not explosive, but corrosive. Anger at being needed constantly. Anger at being taken for granted. Anger at myself for never drawing a line. That anger frightened me. It didn't fit my identity. I had always been the calm one. The stable one. The one who didn't resent helping. Resentment felt like proof that I was becoming someone worse. So I swallowed it. I told myself I was just tired. That everyone feels this way sometimes. That I should be grateful I could help at all. Gratitude became another tool of suppression. I noticed how often people assumed I would handle things. Not maliciously. Naturally. I had trained them well. I didn't correct the assumption. Correcting it would require confrontation. And confrontation felt selfish. I realized something deeply uncomfortable. The more responsible I became, the less anyone saw me as someone who needed anything. Not support. Not rest. Not understanding. I had become infrastructure. Useful. Reliable. Invisible. That invisibility hurt in ways I couldn't articulate. I started fantasizing about absence. Not disappearance, rest. A space where no one expected anything from me. Where my time belonged to me again. Those fantasies came with immediate guilt. How dare I want that? Who would take care of things if I stepped away? The truth was brutal. Things would find another way. They always do. I was not as indispensable as my sense of duty suggested. And that realization shattered something. If I wasn't indispensable, then why had I given up so much? I felt a wave of grief then. For the plans I never made. For the risks I never took. For the version of myself that had been waiting quietly while I handled everything else. I saw clearly how responsibility had become my identity. Without it, I felt hollow. That scared me more than exhaustion. Because it meant I didn't know who I was outside of being needed. I tried, cautiously, to say no once. Just once. The words stuck in my throat. My heart raced. I imagined disappointment. Anger. Judgment. None of it happened. The world adjusted. And that adjustment terrified me. Because it meant the sacrifice had not been required. It had been assumed. And I had never questioned the assumption. The guilt intensified then. Not guilt for failing others. Guilt for failing myself for so long. I realized how many years I had spent confusing responsibility with purpose. Purpose nourishes you. Responsibility drains you. I had been running on depletion and calling it meaning. The moral dilemma became unavoidable. If I continued taking responsibility for everything, I would remain needed. And lose myself completely. If I stepped back, I would feel guilt, discomfort, and fear. But regain some sense of existence. Both paths felt heavy. But only one felt survivable. I didn't know how to untangle myself from expectations I had reinforced for years. I only knew this: responsibility had stopped being something I carried. It had become something that carried me away from my own life. And the longer I stayed silent about that, the more permanent the loss felt. Letting go of responsibility didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing still while something heavy slid off my shoulders. And realizing how bent I had been underneath it. For a long time, I mistook weight for purpose. If something was heavy, it must be important. If it exhausted me, it must matter. If it left me with nothing at the end of the day, I told myself that meant I had given enough. That belief had shaped my entire life. So when I finally stepped back even slightly, I felt exposed. Without constant responsibility, there was silence. And in that silence, a question appeared that I had avoided for years. Who am I when no one needs me? At first, the answer was uncomfortable. I felt empty. Restless. Useless. I had built my identity around being necessary. Without that role, I didn't know how to justify my existence. But I stayed with the discomfort. For the first time, I didn't rush to fill the gap with obligation. I let days pass without proving my worth through usefulness. And slowly, something shifted. I began noticing parts of myself that had been dormant for years. Curiosity. Desire. Preferences I had dismissed as impractical. I noticed how different my energy felt when it wasn't constantly being spent on maintenance. I wasn't calmer. I was clearer. The guilt didn't disappear overnight. It showed up every time I chose myself. Every time I rested without a reason. Every time I said no without offering an explanation. But guilt, I learned, is not always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's the residue of an identity you're outgrowing. I started setting boundaries that felt almost unnatural. Not dramatic boundaries. Simple ones. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't volunteer automatically. I didn't take control just because no one else had yet. The world didn't fall apart. Things adjusted. Some people were surprised. Some were confused. A few were disappointed. That was the price. And it was real. But something else happened alongside it. I began to feel present in my own life again. Not as a caretaker. Not as a stabilizer. As a person. I realized how much of my emotional life had been postponed. I had delayed joy because it felt irresponsible. Delayed rest because it felt undeserved. Delayed exploration because it felt selfish. I stopped postponing. Not recklessly, honestly. I allowed myself to want things without immediately questioning their legitimacy. I allowed myself to feel tired without turning it into another task to manage. I allowed myself to exist without justification. That was the hardest part. We're taught that existence must be earned. Through productivity. Through sacrifice. Through usefulness. I had internalized that deeply. Letting go of responsibility didn't mean abandoning care. It meant redistributing it. Including myself. I learned something that changed everything. Responsibility is meant to be shared. When one person carries it all, it stops being responsibility. It becomes erasure. I didn't stop helping others. I stopped disappearing while doing it. That distinction mattered. My relationships changed. Some softened. Some weakened. Some ended. Not because I became selfish. But because I became visible. Visibility has consequences. Not everyone is comfortable when the person who carried everything steps back and becomes human. I had to grieve that. I had to accept that some connections were built on my exhaustion. Letting those go hurt. But keeping them would have cost me myself. I began rebuilding my life from a different place. Not obligation, choice. I chose when to help. When to rest. When to engage. Choice restored dignity. I wasn't indispensable anymore, and that was a relief I hadn't known I needed. I understood then that I hadn't been living responsibly. I had been living defensively. Responsibility had protected me from asking harder questions. What do I want? What kind of life do I want to inhabit? Who am I without being needed? Those questions no longer terrified me. They felt open. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in it, hear this carefully. You are not required to carry everything to be worthy. You are not obligated to abandon yourself to prove your value. And you are not selfish for wanting a life that includes you. I took responsibility for everyone. And abandoned my own life in the process. But responsibility doesn't have to be all-consuming to be meaningful. Care doesn't have to erase you to be real. I didn't become less responsible when I stepped back. I became more honest. And honesty, I learned, is the only foundation strong enough to hold a life that doesn't quietly disappear under its own weight. I'm still learning. Still adjusting. Still unlearning the belief that my worth depends on how much I carry. But now, when I wake up, my life feels inhabited. Not managed. Not sacrificed. Lived. And that, after years of being needed by everyone else, is the first responsibility I'm finally willing to keep.